of choosing the civil law applied to one estate in accordance with the European regulation in effect since August 2015. So our goal for today is to include a short analysis of some national estate laws. So after the Belgian one, French law, Spanish, Italian, Portuguese, Polish, German, Slovakian, Croatian law, so as to show the interest of comparing possible applicable laws to his or her own estate and make a good choice. Because the good news is that there is a possibility to make a choice. I should stress that we will discuss civil applicable laws today, not the tax laws. That will be done in April, as Stephanie said. And today we will answer questions like, who are my legal heirs? What are they entitled to, each of them? Is it possible to derogate elements of the will from the law? Or are there, my legal heirs, my spouse, my partner, my children, are they entitled to a rightful ownership that we might call reserved portion today as well, or hereditary reserves? The term in French is réserve héréditaire. So are they entitled to a rightful ownership, or do I have full freedom to allocate my assets upon death? Can I sign a contract with my heirs? Can I sign with my spouse and my children while I'm alive, of course, a contract to say or to organize who will receive what? This has been contrary to Belgian law for decades. It was supposed to be contrary to public order, because one can always be afraid that one spouse would try to influence the other one. One can imagine one spouse is sick, is nearly to die, and at that time the other one has a contract ready to be signed. So this was forbidden. Now, partly thanks to French law, this will be authorized. There has been a deep reform of Belgian law, of Belgian inheritance law, approved a few months ago, and which will come into effect in September 2018, so in 6 months from now. And we will only speak of this new law today, Antoine and I. It's however good to know that law has changed, because some of you might have made donation, gifts, or made a will according to Belgian law in the past. And the reform will have consequences on past deeds. So if this is the case for any of you, it would be worth to think twice about maintaining the conditions of the past, these past gifts, or maintaining the will as it was drafted in the past. So let's start with the possibility. I beg your pardon? Yeah. Let's start with the possibility of choosing the civil law applied to one's estate. There are two. Sorry for that. No, I think this would be better. Possibility to choose a civil law. There are two possible scenarios. The first one is that the deceased is a usual resident of the European Union, in any country of the Union. Any country except a few countries, Ireland, the UK and Denmark, who did not approve the regulation we'll talk about today. Still, the UK accepts some consequences of this regulation. I will come to that later. But anyway, as a consequence of the Brexit, we don't know exactly where the UK will stand. So, first scenario, if the deceased is a usual resident of the UK, of the EU, it's not still the same country. The deceased, which is not dead yet, has a choice. Has a choice of law, and he can choose either. Well, he can choose the law of his nationality, and then either the nationality he has at the time of his will, of the time when he makes the choice of the applicable law. I live in Belgium, but I'm from Poland, and so my nationality is Polish. I can choose Polish law now. Now, other questions will arise. I might change nationality, and in 20 years from now, I will be Spanish, because I like Spain very much, and I will have a house there, and I will spend years, and I will retire there. What about my choice? Or can I choose Spanish law either now or then? Well, to reply to it, we will come to that later on, but I can choose Spanish law even now if I'm sure I will be Spanish when upon death. So I can make a choice which is the law of my nationality, either at the time when I make the choice or upon death. If I do not make a choice, then the applicable law will be the one of the country in which I reside. We will come to the notion of residence in a few moments. The second scenario is that the deceased was not a resident of the European Union. We'll not talk about that today, but just for the case that some of you would not be residents of the EU, it's good to know that that it's slightly more complicated than the person can make a choice which is can choose the law of his European nationality. For instance, a Belgian person being a resident of the United States can choose the Belgian law if he has assets in Belgium upon death. Anyway, this probably is not your situation, and I suggest not to investigate this second scenario. Here we are. So what is the usual residence? Why do I ask the question? Because if I do not make the choice of my nationality, and I will have a look quickly, I'm sorry about that. Yes. Being a usual resident of the European Union is an autonomous notion, meaning that I do not have to understand what my country of origin understands by usual resident. I do not have to check what Belgium understands by usual residence. The 2012 regulation organizes the usual residence as an autonomous notion. And two conditions must be met to interpret this notion. In order to determine first an objective condition and then a second condition, in order to determine whether the objective condition is met, one must look at first where the center of my personal and family interest is. Where is my spouse, my partner? Where are my children? Where are their schools? Where is my tennis club? Where are my suits, my robes? Where are my shoes? Where is my doctor? Where is my lawyer? Where are my friends? So this is the center of my personal and family interests. Then one must look at the place where my profession is exercised, it should be easy for you. It is Belgium. And then where my assets are located, there is no ranking in this criteria. So the local court or the Court of Justice will probably provide for a ranking in the following years, but today we can only say that there are 3 objective criteria. These are not very different from the national criteria, well, the usual national criteria, but you could have in your country of origin criteria for civil residents. Don't forget, please, I speak of civil residents, not the residents for tax purposes. You could have criteria like only where my assets are located. Or in Belgium, there are 2 criteria. One is where or from where do I manage my assets, not where they are located, but from where do I manage them? It's the same in Switzerland. Well, you don't care very much about Switzerland, maybe, but this is a criteria which is not where my properties are. My profession is exercised in this country, but maybe most of my revenues originate from another country because I have a huge bank account in Switzerland. So my revenues mainly originate then from Switzerland or from my country of origin where I have left my bank accounts and real estate and so on. But the criteria here is in which country do I exercise my profession. Then we have a subjective condition, which is, this condition is met once it can be demonstrated that I had the intention to establish a stable and permanent center of my vital interests in this country, or wherever it is, or wherever in the Union. So I have to show not only that my assets are there or that I am maybe temporarily working there, I also have to show that I have had the intention to establish the center of my interest there. Sometimes it could happen that I had the intention of establishing my center of vital interest in any country, for instance in Spain, where there is much sun and I like that. But I had no time to locate my assets there. I had no time to maybe to find a new job there. But then the subjective condition will be met, and Spain could become my country of residence for civil purposes. Now, I should stress that the residence I talk about is the civil residence, as you will have understood it. But this might be different from the residence for tax purposes. Your residence, or the residence of most of you for tax purposes, is your country of origin. But, so you can have a residence, your present residence may be in Poland, in Slovakia, in the UK, in France. That's the place where you have to fill a tax return. But for inheritance purposes, the residence of most of you today is in Belgium. And so, if some of you was to die tomorrow, Belgian law would apply. So Belgian civil law, that is the reason why we will spend some time explaining what Belgian law provides for. And it is only if you make the choice, you express the choice, so which will be the one of your nationality, that Belgian law would not apply. You can choose only one single law, and only even if you don't make a choice, only one single law will apply to your estate. Or your residence is in Belgium, it might be Belgian law, which will apply to your whole estate, Even if you have a house in Spain, if you have your bank account in Luxembourg, if you have your whatever, your children in France, Belgian law will apply. If you choose, because you are of Polish origin, you choose Polish law, even if you have no assets in Poland, you have your marital home here, your spouse, your children, your bank account, your suits, your shoes, and your friends here, Polish law will apply to all these assets located in Belgium. Okay? The ways to express this choice now, it is either through a will. So tonight, when coming back home, you can draft a will. I'll come back to the way to draft a will, but you can do that on your own. Either through a will or in an inheritance pact, inheritance agreement, which is that kind of contract I spoke about. If you want to sign a contract with your partner and with your children to say what everybody should receive, you can choose the law applicable to your estate at that time. The etc. means that you can also make a choice in a gift agreement. But then the gift agreement, the choice will only apply to this gift. You cannot make a choice for your whole estate in a gift agreement. So, well, this is not really essential. Yes, now coming back to the nationality, if you want to make a choice and you have multiple nationalities, what to do? You can make a choice amongst your nationalities. If you change nationality, as I said earlier, you can choose already now your future nationality if you know it, or you can make another choice later. It can be your nationality of death. If you have a nationality and your spouse another one, that doesn't matter. You may not choose your husband or wife's nationality. Let me think twice about a case we had. I'm not sure I will remember, but we had a client who was, Gregory, a client who was a Frenchman. Yes, a Frenchman who wanted to come to settle in Belgium. And he had a wife of African origin from Congo. Yeah. And then in Congo, the spouse has no rightful ownership. So he wanted to give everything to his wife, and she agreed. And in France, as well as in Belgium, the children have rightful ownerships, and he had not seen his children for 25 years. It was a family with some problems, and so he came to see us, and he asked how to do. He was ready to go to Germany, just above the river, on the other side of the river, and to settle there. Why was it useful for him to do that? Because in Germany you can make something, you can draft a will in a manner you cannot use either in France or in Congo or in Belgium, which were the three countries in stake. In Germany you can make a will, what we call in French un testament conjonctif, which is a joint will, a will signed by both parties, by husband and wife. And in that case, you can make the choice of one nationality. And this can be the nationality of either spouse. So it could be the nationality of the wife in this case, the Congolese nationality. And so by settling on the other side of the Rhine, of the river, they could make the choice of the Congolese nationality of the lady, and so he could then allocate all his assets to his wife. You see, that's what lawyers do. So, concerning different nationalities and the choice that can be done, well, if you have other questions, we will have some time for that later today. And we have reserved portions in most countries, as I said.
About the EU protocol?
I beg your pardon?
The EU protocol, you did not mention that?
What to say about that? Protocol. Well, that it provides for the choice. Yeah, no, I have nothing special to say except that. Oh no, sorry, the protocol. I was thinking about the regulation. Yes, the protocol. Yes, provides for the tax residence for every one of you. So your residence for tax purposes is in your country of origin, and this one is not the same residence as your real residence, which is today probably for most of you Belgium. Okay, that is what I wanted to say. Thank you very much. Now to come to Belgian inheritance law. That's it. If Belgian law applies to one's estate, the assets that will be taken into account will be calculated in two manners. The first one, the one you would think to most probably at once, is what does the person leave upon death? Which assets do I leave? Maybe my home, maybe my bank account with that amount in it, well, the amount I will not have spent earlier. Well, maybe some furnitures, my car, again a house in Spain. That's it. These true assets will be divided between spouse, children, and possibly third parties. We cannot, well, one may not allocate too much to the third parties, since spouse and children have rightful ownerships on a portion of the estate. I'll be back to that. But so, at first glance, what will be shared is what I have saved. It's correct. And then we come to the reserved portion of the spouse and the children, and this will be calculated on these assets, plus all the gifts I made in the past, plus the amount of money I have placed in an insurance company to be paid to anyone. The legal inheritance devolution, in the absence of a will, is that the surviving spouse will get the usufruct and the children the bare ownership. Very easy. Okay. So my spouse will have the benefits of my estate, will have the revenues. In my case, I can say she will be entitled to live in the marital home. She will have the interest from my bank account, and so on. And the children will have to wait until she dies to get the full ownership. Now, I can derogate the will through the law through my will, or through an inheritance agreement. So I can say with the agreement of my wife, well, I'd like to give everything to our children except maybe the marital home, and she doesn't care. She's okay. I can do that, and well, Well, I'm sorry for that.
Probably we are now with the computer. We obliged you to shut down.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so as I said, one can deviate from this process of legal inheritance devolution through a will or in an inheritance agreement. I'll come to that at the next slide. Yes, well, all of you may not be used to the terms usufruct of bare ownership. If there is any question about that, maybe you can raise it now. No. So I can derogate through a will. A will can be a private document. So it can be drafted, as I said, tonight at home. It can be alone. You don't need a witness. It can be drafted in the presence of a lawyer so as to get legal advice on the legality and or any issues that may arise from the will. Or it can be done in a notarized way. If it is done in a private way, either alone or with a lawyer, it must be written by the testator himself or herself. So in his own handwriting, on a blank sheet of paper. I remember a succession in which the mother had signed her will, or had drafted her will in her own handwriting, on a blank sheet of paper, except that it was written the name of her house, something like Le Manoir, or the castle, I don't remember, on the top of the paper sheet. And the will was considered null and void. Must be 100% written by hand. Then one can organize everything in his or her will. I give this house to the house in Spain to my elder daughter, the house in Belgium to my eldest son, the bank account to my younger daughter. I give the furniture coming from my grandmother to my wife, and I give maybe more than the reserved portion to my wife in the form of usufruct. Well, I organize it the way I want. I can also make a will which will only say, I choose Slovakian law. I choose French law, and I know what French law provides for. It's okay for me. But I don't like Belgian law. So I make this choice, and that will be my will. Now, starting from where we are now, that Belgian law would apply. Do I have an absolute freedom to draft my will as I wish, or do I have an obligation to respect rightful ownerships? I do. My children are entitled to 1/2 of my estate. I cannot give more. I cannot give to my spouse or to third parties such amounts or so many assets that my children will not have at least 1/2 of my estate. My spouse is entitled to have my estate in usufruct. That is the minimum, the vital minimum for her to survive. So have my estate in usufruct for her or for him, for the surviving spouse, 1/2 for the children. And what about the third parties then? Well, the third parties may receive 1/2 of my estate. So there are 3 halves. 1/2 of my estate. And this will be the same half as my wife in my case. So meaning that they will only receive bare ownership because she will have the usufruct. And my children will have full ownership of half of it, half of my estate. Yeah. I could add that the spouse also has a dedicated reserved portion which is the usufruct on the marital home. And so whatever the value of this home, it might be 100% of my assets upon death, she is entitled to the usufruct of the marital home in any case. And so if the marital home is worth, let's say, 100,000 euros, while my assets, my full estate is worth 500,000, she's entitled to the usufruct of half my estate, meaning usufruct on 250,000, including the marital home, not on top of it. 250,000 including the marital home. But the marital home is worth 400,000 on the global assets of 500,000. She will be entitled to the usufruct of the marital home, so the usufruct of 400,000. Okay? Well, this is not very complicated. The idea is that she or he is allowed to continue living in the same place anyway. Now, if the portions are not respected, so I have given too much to my best friend, my children and my wife are entitled to claim something from him. They will be entitled to claim the equivalent in cash, but they are not entitled to claim the asset itself. And I have given the furniture from my grandmother I was talking about. Really, my wife loves it. She not claim the furniture itself. But my best friend who received, well, maybe something else, let's say shares of my company, my law firm is not worth very much, but I would be, something else. If I gave him the shares of my company, and if these shares have dramatically dropped down in value, he is not obliged to pay back an amount equivalent to the value of the shares at the time of him receiving them. It was worth 2 million euros at the time. Now I have a company in linked to whatever. And now, when I die, it is worth 500,000. He has not to pay back 2 million euros. He can just give the shares back, but it is his choice. Okay, I gave him some piece of ground somewhere, again in Spain on the beach. And he was very happy with that, but it happens that this piece of land is polluted. It's worth nothing. It will cost so much to get the pollution out of it that when my children ask for the money equivalent to this piece of land, he will say, please take the piece of land back. Yes, and now something else is that the calculation to know what the rightful ownerships are. What is the reserved portion for my wife, for my husband, for my children? This calculation is not made on the assets I leave upon death. It is made, the calculation is made, taking into account the assets I leave, plus what you have on the right-hand side, plus the value of all the gifts I made in the past, plus the capital amount I paid to insurance companies for the company to pay, the capital to my best friend when I die. So in Belgium, we take into account, to calculate the minimum share of the legal heirs, we take into account all the gifts made in the past, even if they were made 20 years before the testator dies. Now, the testator or just the person dies. Until recently, one could pay huge amounts to an insurance company for the company to pay to anyone the corresponding capital. That was kind of derogation to the reserved portion. It is no more the case. So everything will be added, and then the calculation will be made. You can imagine the problem of knowing what has been given. And then you probably ask yourself, without daring asking it loudly, but what if I gave 3,000 euros to my daughter to for Christmas? What about my 100,000 euros to WWF 10 years ago? What about what I gave to my best friend when he was in a bad financial situation? Well, everything could have to be taken into account, but the courts have usually excluded, and more than usually, always excluded, the usual gift, Christmas gifts, what has been paid even to a child and not to the others, like paying, 100,000 euros for one of the children to spend a year in the United States for an MBA. And the others have not received that kind of gift, but that will not be taken into account. Otherwise, everything is counted. There we are. Okay. And this is slide number 8, and I go to number 11. Okay. 5 minutes. Okay, fine. So on the Belgian law, with effect on September 2018, you and I will be entitled to sign a contract with our heirs, our children and spouse. This contract must include all the heirs, except that the spouse can choose being part of it or not. Because he or she could be afraid of losing rights on the estate of the supposed to die spouse. And could estimate that it's safer not to sign anything and wait to know what he or she will leave upon death. Maybe he will go to play in a casino in a few years after having signed the agreement and spent half his bank account in the casino, and so the spouse maybe will prefer not to sign, and it's okay. All the children have to sign, and all the heirs who are already chosen should sign, but all the third parties could be elected later. So my best friend, in my example, I could change friends. So father and or mother, the descendants and the awarded individuals. The objectives of inheritance pact are mainly to ensure peace in the family. You would not, except if you read a lot of books, you would not imagine the number of families we meet when the father or the mother has died, who cannot find an agreement, and sometimes for really small reasons, I remember having gone to France for a Belgian family. Father and mother lived there. Well, officially they still were residents of Belgium, but actually they were living on the southern coast. And they had invited their children. They knew that their family was a difficult one. And they tried to find an agreement. It was not yet possible, but the idea was to have the basis for an agreement to be signed later, when the law would have been finally approved. And one of the children asked one question, which was, where is the red divan, the red sofa that was in the hall of the house when we were young? Because her dad had her sitting on his knees when she was 10 years old, and she wanted to have this sofa. And the sofa had gone to Portugal to the other daughter. And she said, I don't want to hear anything about an agreement if I do not have the sofa. So nothing could be done. And the father, who had already made a big effort to have to agree to sign anything with his children, he really preferred just leaving things as they were, and they had only to organize that by themselves upon his death, and now he's dead. Well, he just said then, okay, we'll spend a good weekend together, and that's it. Let's not speak about it at all, about the sofa and the estate and his wife's assets. So the inheritance agreement is something very useful because it's much more easy usually, except in my example, to find an agreement when father and mother are there. It is very useful for the parents to hear that their children are sometimes not too eager for money or for valued assets, but sometimes for sentimental assets. That maybe you would prefer the marital home, which is worth 100, than the house on the Grand Place, which doubles, which value doubles every 10 years. Good to hear that. Otherwise, you would have legally all the assets becoming the property of all the heirs. In indivision, joint ownership of everything by everybody, or by the legal heirs. The third parties receive particular assets. They could also receive the usufruct of everything, but it's not very often the case. So to avoid also the sale of the family assets, because one of the heirs is really not interested in that asset that he owns 1/3 of, but he does not agree with the value the others give to the asset. He doesn't want to sell them his share. The children and the spouse will have to sell the asset and then share the price. So drafting and signing an inheritance pact is very useful. This will start being done only in September officially, but actually we have already started thinking about this kind of agreement for some persons. I said that because it can take some time, and it should be thought about first by the parents or by either the mother or the father alone, and then probably be thought about a second time with a lawyer, either an avocat or a notary public, and then it must be signed before a notary public. And then notary public will say, now please go to see your lawyer another time. This is provided by law. And then come back and sign. The types of agreements can be well, a comprehensive inheritance agreement or an asset-specific inheritance agreement. It's okay. As I said, the gift to anyone, to the children, to the spouse, not only to the children as it is, or to the spouse as written on here, but they may have to be taken into account again to make the calculation for the legal portions that every heir is entitled to. The usufruct on half the estate for the husband or wife, for instance. Now, another question is, if I give something to one of my children, is it a final gift, or do he or she have to give it back at the time of my death? He will have to give it back, at least virtually. Any gift made to an heir is deemed an advance on my inheritance, except if I specifically, expressly provide for that this will be not an advance but a kind of privilege. Otherwise, what I give, if I have 3 children and one of my children really needs more money than the other ones for any reason, and I give him 1 million euros while the others only receive nothing, and at the time of my death I have 500,000 euros on my bank account, my full estate will then be 1.5 million euros, taking into account previous gifts. So that's the amount onto which the calculation will be made. But without even having, if when the children start asking for this calculation, it means that there might be problems in the family. The first step is just to ask what has everybody received. And then one of the children will say, I have received 1 million. Okay, thank you, John. Very fair to recall it. Now, your million is regarded as an advance on the estate. So we are supposed to have 1.5 million in front of us. In my example, the legal portions have been violated, so you will have to pay it back really. Because my spouse, for instance, she's entitled to half my estate in the form of usufruct. My estate is 1.5, so she's entitled to 750,000 euros in usufruct. And there is only 500,000 left in my bank account. So she will say to this child, well, please give me the usufruct on 250. But so, to come back on the principle, because here I make it more complicated. The basic rule is, when an heir receives a gift, it is regarded as an advance payment on the estate, and either he pays it back to the estate upon death, or he just says it. I received that amount. Okay, this is already part of your share. I leave 5 million on my bank account upon death, and one of my children has received 1 million. He will be deemed having already received part of the estate. So it's not the remaining 5 million will not be divided by 3 if I have 3 children. Let's forget the spouse for the time being. He will not be entitled to 1.667, so 1,667,000, 1/3 of the 5 million. He will say, okay, I received an advance of 1 million, so the real estate is 6 million. Each of us, we're entitled to 2 million. Okay? In blended families, which is a usual situation today, I would just stress the point that, and it's very useful because many of you might have the Belgian law applicable to their estate. Even if you work for the Commission area, I recall it. At the time of a second marriage, Belgian law provides for that it is possible to include in the wedding contract that the second husband or second wife is not entitled to anything in my estate. He or she, so the second husband or wife, will only be entitled to the usufruct on the marital home, and even that I can derogate in a will to that right. But I have to provide it in the will. We have a client who is a very wealthy man owning a family company. He married a second wife, and he has 3 children, 2 daughters and a boy. He married a second wife, and they agreed at the time of the wedding that she should not have any right on the shares of the family business. And so that is what is called in French vacancy, it's a Flemish word, clause valkeniers. And then the interactions between the surviving spouse and the children from the previous wedding will be limited in the way, but I have not much time to explain that into details, in the way that they will not be on the same assets. Now, we will take a few national laws through an example, the same one, under French law, Spanish law, Belgian law, and so on. So as to show you the interest of looking at the different laws to possibly make a choice one day. And even if you have only one nationality and you live in Belgium and you might think, well, I have to choose between French law because I'm a Frenchman or French woman and Belgian law, that is not true. Because you can become a resident of Spain or of Poland or of any country in the European Union or even outside the European Union, but that is maybe too much for today. But just the fact that you will have your residence at the time when you retire, for instance, in another country can make this law applicable. And so it might be a criteria to choose going to Portugal rather than to Spain, for instance. So in Belgium, with 1 surviving spouse and 2 children, the estate distribution with no will is that the spouse will have the usufruct of the entire estate and the children bear ownership of the estate. With a will, the spouse has at least or receives at least the usufruct on half the estate, and the children, when there are 2 children, 1/4 each. Actually, the reserved portion for the children, and you can have how many children you want, is half the estate. So here we have 2 children, that's why it is 1/4 for each. The joint will is prohibited. The joint will is the story I told earlier with this lady from Congolese origin with a Frenchman going to Germany to sign a joint will. So this is forbidden in Belgium, and the inheritance agreement is okay in Belgium. Now I hand it over microphone to Antoine.
So hello everyone, thank you for being here. We'll continue with French law. I may have to skip 1 or 2 countries in the end. Don't feel frustrated because these are all described in the slides, but because of time constraints. So in France, if we take the same example, and that will be the same example for all the following states as well. So 1 person leaving a spouse and 2 children behind. The estate distribution in the absence of a will is that the surviving spouse will have the choice in the presence of children between receiving the ownership of 1/4 of the estate in full ownership or receiving an usufruct on the entire estate. and the remainder will go to the children. If we take the specific case of what we call a pax, so if the couple was not married but concluded a civil partnership instead, the surviving civil partner will not have any rightful ownership, but will have a right to remain in the marital home for a maximum of a year. That's all he will get per default under common law. Then, if the deceased prepared a will, then it will be different, because even if there is some freedom, the deceased must have respected the reserved portions of his legal heirs. So the spouse must receive at least a quarter in full ownership if there are no children, no joint children of the entire estate. If there are children, she does not have any, there is no reserved portion for the spouse, and the children must at least receive a third of the entire estate that they must split equally amongst between them. Again, it is forbidden, as it is the case in Belgium, to prepare a joint will, and it is authorized to conclude an inheritance agreement with the heirs. If we move on to Spain now, so in Spain the situation is a bit more complex. In the absence of a will, then it is easy, because the children will inherit the entire estate in full ownership, except for the reserved portion of the spouse, which is 1/3 in usufruct of the estate. If the person who died prepared a will, then the children must at least receive 1/3 of the estate in full ownership. That is the third that we see on the right on the slide, and the spouse must receive at least 1/3 in usufruct. So the bare ownership of that third, the third that is inherited by the spouse, must go to descendants of the deceased. That's what Spanish call mayor. I don't know if I pronounce it well. And the remainder, so the last third of the estate, can be freely given to anyone, including, of course, the spouse, the children, but also third parties. One must keep in mind, however, that there are some particularities in Spain related to the various autonomous communities. So, as you probably know, there are 17 autonomous communities in Spain, which can all deviate from the federal estate law. So we have just, we put a few examples on the slide just to show you the differences. If the deceased lived in Catalonia, for example, his surviving spouse does not have any reserve, but he or she can claim funds from the estate of the deceased to cover the basic living expenses. In Navarra, there is full freedom. So there, the surviving spouse and the children do not have any reserved portion. So the general rules above will not apply. And in other communities such as Madrid or Andalusia, one will apply the common rules which are described in the chart above. Again, it is forbidden in Spain to prepare a joint will, and it is also forbidden to conclude an inheritance agreement, except for some communities that allow inheritance agreements. In Portugal, the devolution in the absence of a will is quite easy, because one will simply divide the estate by the number of heirs living at the time of death. So in this case, if there is a spouse and two children, they will each inherit 1/3 of the estate. Only the spouse has a legal reserve which amounts to 1/4 in full ownership of the estate. She or he must not inherit less than that quarter. So in this example, the spouse will inherit 1/3 of the estate in full ownership, but should there be more than three children, then the surviving spouse will always inherit at least 1/4. If there is a will, again there is freedom, but the spouse and the children must inherit at least 2/3 ownership of the estate that they must divide equally between them. And finally, a joint will is forbidden in Spain, as well as an inheritance agreement, except if you are married, spouses may conclude an inheritance agreement between them. And finally, in Italy, in the absence of a will, the spouse the spouse will inherit 1/3 of the estate, and the remainder goes to the children. So in our example, they will both inherit 1/3. In presence of a will, the spouse must inherit at least 1/4 in full ownership of the entire estate, and the children must inherit together at least half of the entire estate that is split equally between them. There is a particularity regarding the marital home that must go to the surviving spouse. So again, as it is the case in Belgium, it is a bit different in Belgium because in Belgium the marital home goes in usufruct to the surviving spouse, but in Italy it's in full ownership. If that house or that estate is worth more than all the other assets, I rephrase it. If the estate left by the deceased is composed only by the marital home, then the only person who will inherit something from the deceased is the spouse, and the children will receive nothing because there is nothing left. A joint will is also prohibited in in Italy, and it is also forbidden to sign an inheritance agreement. We had also prepared a slide about Poland, but we will pass this one. It is included in your slide presentation.
It's a big Polish community, so it might be.
Well, I can do this one then, and we will skip another state which has quite a similar regime at the end. Okay, so for Poland, in the absence of a will, each heir will inherit 1/3 of the estate. In the presence of a will, the spouse and the children must inherit at least half of the portion that they would inherit if there was no will. So in our example, the spouse and the children will each inherit at least 1/6 of the entire estate. There are specific rules if the spouse or the children are unfit for work, or if the children are minors, then they might they are entitled to receive at least 2/3 of what they would have received should there be no will. Again, it is prohibited in Spain to prepare a joint will, and inheritance agreements are authorized if they are made to renounce to the inheritance. I'll let now Manuel present British estate law.
Since time is running, I would suggest maybe to have the question time now.
Yes.